I saw my dead husband on a Tuesday afternoon. He was standing in the produce section of Morrison's grocery, squeezing apples the way he always did, gentle pressure with his thumb, checking for firmness, discarding the ones that didn't meet his standards. It was such a familiar gesture, so intimately James, the way he tilted his head, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows, the particular stance, weight on his left foot, right hand doing the work. I had watched him do that exact thing hundreds of times over 14 years of marriage. But James was dead. He had been dead for 6 months. I had buried him. I had mourned him. I had scattered half his ashes in the ocean, the way he had always wanted. And now he was standing 20 feet away from me, very much alive, examining Honeycrisp apples like nothing had ever happened. I stood frozen in the cereal aisle, my cart half filled with groceries I would never remember selecting. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My vision seemed to narrow, tunneling toward that figure in the produce section. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, suddenly too bright, too harsh. I was hallucinating. That was the only explanation. Grief does strange things to the mind. I had read about it. Bereaved spouses seeing their loved ones in crowds, hearing their voices in empty rooms, the brain creating phantoms to fill the unbearable void of loss. This was that. This had to be that. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, forced myself to breathe. When I opened my eyes, he would be gone. He would transform into a stranger, someone who merely resembled James, someone my grieving mind had twisted into an impossible vision. I opened my eyes. He was still there, and he was turning toward me. I ducked behind a display of cereal boxes, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Through a gap between Cheerios and Frosted Flakes, I watched him. His profile was unmistakable. The strong jaw, the slightly crooked nose from a childhood baseball accident, the way his hair curled just slightly at the temples. It was James. Not someone who looked like James, not a doppelganger or a long-lost twin. James. My husband. The man I had loved for 14 years. The man I had buried 6 months ago. He moved through the produce section with easy familiarity, selecting apples and oranges, adding a bunch of bananas to his cart. He was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a blue polo shirt, khaki pants, brown loafers. James never wore brown loafers. He was strictly a sneakers or dress shoes man. But everything else was him. The walk, the gestures, the way he paused to check his phone, scrolling with his right thumb while holding the device in his left hand. I knew that man's body better than I knew my own. And that body was supposed to be dead. I followed him through the store. I stayed far enough back to avoid detection, using other shoppers as cover, keeping my cart between us like a shield. He moved methodically through the aisles. Bread, milk, eggs, pasta, a bottle of wine, red, the kind he always preferred. Every selection was so normal, so mundane, so exactly like the husband I had known. But he wasn't my husband anymore. He was a ghost who somehow had a body, a dead man who was very much alive. He checked out at Register 7. I watched from a distance, pretending to examine a magazine rack, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the glossy pages. He chatted with the cashier, smiled, laughed at something she said. That smile. I had fallen in love with that smile 20 years ago when we were both graduate students at the same university. I had seen that smile on our wedding day when I walked down the aisle. I had seen it the last morning I ever saw him alive, or thought I did, when he kissed me goodbye and left for a business trip he would never return from. He paid with a credit card, collected his bags, walked toward the exit. And I made a decision that would change everything. I abandoned my cart and followed him. His car was parked near the back of the lot. Not the silver Honda Accord he had driven for the past 5 years. This was a black Ford Explorer, newer, larger, unfamiliar. I watched him load his groceries into the back. I watched him climb into the driver's seat. I watched him adjust his mirror, check his phone one more time, and start the engine. And then, before I could second-guess myself, I ran to my own car and followed him out of the parking lot. I stayed 3 cars behind, the way I had seen in movies. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My heart was racing. My mind was a chaos of questions I couldn't begin to answer. How was he alive? Whose body was in that car? Did he know I had seen him? Where was he going? The drive lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes of following my dead husband through streets I didn't recognize, into a neighborhood I had never visited, toward a life I knew nothing about. He turned onto a quiet residential street, lined with modest suburban homes. White picket fences, manicured lawns, children's bicycles leaning against garages. It looked like the setting of a family sitcom, wholesome, normal American dream. He pulled into the driveway of a pale yellow house with blue shutters. A garden gnome stood guard by the mailbox. Wind chimes tinkled gently on the front porch. I parked across the street, 2 houses down, and watched. The front door opened before James even reached the porch. A woman emerged, mid-30s maybe, blonde hair, warm smile, pretty in a comfortable, familiar way. She walked toward James with easy affection. He set down his grocery bags and pulled her into his arms. They kissed. Not a friendly peck, not a casual greeting. A real kiss, deep, intimate, the kiss of lovers who had done this 1,000 times. I felt like I was going to vomit. And then, before I could process what I was seeing, the front door burst open again. A child ran out, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, dark hair flying behind her, princess dress swirling around her ankles. Daddy's home. She launched herself at James, and he caught her with practiced ease, swinging her up into his arms, pressing kisses to her cheeks while she giggled and squirmed. "There's my princess," he said. "Did you miss me?" "So much, Daddy. I made you a picture." "You did. Let me see." He carried her toward the house, one arm around the blonde woman, the other holding his daughter. A family. A complete, happy family. A family that had nothing to do with me. I sat in my car for what felt like hours. The sun set. The streetlights flickered on. The yellow house glowed warmly from within, shadows moving behind curtained windows. I watched them eat dinner through a gap in the curtains. I watched them move around the living room. I watched the lights go out one by one as the household settled into sleep. And I sat in the darkness, trying to understand how my entire life had been a lie. My name is Evelyn. I was 43 years old on the day I saw my dead husband in the grocery store. I had been married to James Mitchell for 14 years. We had no children, we had tried, but it never happened, and eventually we had made peace with a life that was just the 2 of us. Or so I thought. Because apparently James had children, at least one child, a little girl with his dark hair and his easy smile. A daughter I knew nothing about. A family I had never imagined. A life that had been unfolding parallel to mine for God knows how long. James had been a pharmaceutical sales representative. He traveled frequently, 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes more. He visited hospitals and clinics across the region, building relationships with doctors, promoting new medications. At least, that's what he told me. Now I wondered what else he had been doing during those trips. How many nights he had spent in that yellow house with the wind chimes. How many bedtime stories he had read to that little girl. How many kisses he had shared with that blonde woman. How much of our marriage had been real, and how much had been performance. 6 months ago, 2 police officers had arrived at my door. There had been an accident, they said. A car had gone off a bridge on a rural highway. The vehicle had caught fire. The body inside was badly burned. But they had identified it as James. Dental records, his wedding ring, his wallet with his driver's license, somehow partially preserved. They were sorry for my loss. I had collapsed. I had screamed. I had refused to believe it until they showed me photographs of the wreckage, the twisted metal, the blackened frame, everything I had loved reduced to ash and ruin. I had buried him, or I had buried something, someone. Because apparently, James was alive. And I needed to know how. I didn't sleep that night. I drove home in a fog, my mind cycling through the same impossible images over and over. James at the grocery store. James kissing that woman. James swinging that little girl into his arms. Daddy's home. The words echoed in my skull like a scream. I had grieved for 6 months. I had cried myself to sleep. I had sorted through his belongings, donated his clothes, framed his photographs. I had started the slow, painful process of learning to live without him. And the entire time, he had been 20 minutes away, living another life, being another man, father to a child I didn't know existed. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at nothing. My mind was a battlefield of emotions. Grief, still raw, still present, warred with confusion. Confusion warred with anger. Anger warred with disbelief. How was this possible? How could a man fake his own death? How could he maintain 2 complete lives for years without anyone discovering the truth? And perhaps most importantly, who was buried in that grave with James's name on it? The sun rose. I made coffee I didn't drink. I showered, I dressed. And then I began to investigate. I was a librarian by profession. Research was my specialty. Finding information, tracing connections, following threads until they revealed patterns, these were skills I had honed over 20 years. Now I would use them to uncover the truth about my own husband. I started with the woman. I had seen the house. The address was seared into my memory, 847 Willow Creek Lane. A quick property search revealed the owner, Sandra Miller. Miller, not Mitchell. James had been using a different name. I dug deeper. Public records, social media, marriage licenses, birth certificates. The picture that emerged was devastating. James Mitchell and David Miller were the same person. He had created a complete second identity, driver's license, social security number, credit history. As David Miller, he had been married to Sandra Evelyn Porter for 9 years. 9 years. Our marriage had lasted 14, which meant for 5 years, 5 years of my life, James had been married to both of us simultaneously. Bigamy. My husband was a bigamist. I found Sandra's Facebook profile. It was mostly public, photos of family vacations, holiday gatherings, birthday parties. A chronicle of a happy suburban life that I had no part in. But I was everywhere in that chronicle's shadows. Photos of David at Christmas, while I thought James was visiting his sick mother in Florida. Photos of David at Lily's birthday party, while I thought James was at a medical conference in Chicago. Photos of David and Sandra at a resort in the Bahamas, during the same week James told me he had emergency training in Houston. Every business trip, every conference, every family obligation that pulled him away. Lies, all of it. Lies designed to create windows of time for his other life. I found the wedding photos. Sandra in a white dress. David in a black tuxedo. A beachside ceremony, intimate and beautiful. The date was exactly 2 weeks after James, and I returned from our 10th anniversary trip to Paris. He had married another woman 14 days after celebrating a decade of marriage with me. I kept digging. I found birth records for Lily Marie Miller, born 6 years ago. Father, David James Miller. Mother, Sandra Evelyn Miller. David James. He had used his real first name as his middle name. A small vanity. A tiny thread of truth woven into an elaborate tapestry of lies. Lily was his daughter, his real daughter, flesh and blood. The child I had never been able to give him, the child we had tried for years to conceive, he had created with another woman. The financial records were even more damning. James had taken out a life insurance policy on himself 3 years ago. The beneficiary was me, Evelyn Mitchell. The payout was $500,000. The insurance company had paid out 6 months ago, after James's death was confirmed. $500,000. I had received it. It was sitting in my bank account right now, part of the modest fortune I had inherited from my late husband. But that wasn't all. I discovered that David Miller also had a life insurance policy. Same company, same face on the application photo. The beneficiary of that policy was Sandra Miller. The payout was $750,000. But that policy hadn't been triggered because David Miller was still alive. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. James had been planning to fake his death for years. He had created the David Miller identity as an escape hatch. He had built a complete second life, wife, daughter, house, job history, as a safety net. When the time was right, he would die as James Mitchell. He would collect the insurance money through me somehow, or simply abandon that life entirely and continue living as David Miller. He would shed one identity like a snake shedding skin and continue with the other. I was the skin he had chosen to discard. But something didn't add up. If James had faked his death to escape his life with me, why was I still receiving the insurance money? Wouldn't he have needed to collect it himself? I went back through the records, the policy payout, the claim documents, the death certificate. Everything had been filed correctly. The money had been deposited directly into my account, an account James had full access to. An account James was still accessing. I checked our joint account history for the past 6 months. Small withdrawals, cash advances, transfers to unfamiliar accounts. He had been siphoning money from our accounts, from my accounts, even after his death. I had assumed these were automatic payments, subscription services I had forgotten to cancel. I had been too grief-stricken to examine them closely. But now I saw the pattern. Regular withdrawals, always in amounts small enough to avoid triggering alerts, always to accounts I didn't recognize. James hadn't just faked his death. He was robbing his grieving widow. I found more. Over the past 5 years, significant sums had been transferred from our savings to accounts in David Miller's name. Our retirement fund had been slowly depleted. Investments I thought were growing had been liquidated. James had been stealing from me for years, funding his other life, building his escape route. And I had never suspected a thing. I spent 3 days in a research frenzy. I barely slept. I barely ate. I tracked every thread, followed every connection, documented every lie. The picture that emerged was comprehensive and devastating. James Mitchell was a con man. He had married me for my stability, my income, my family money. He had used our marriage as a base while he built something else, a different identity, a different family, a different future. And when the time was right, he had staged his own death and walked away. Except he hadn't walked far enough. He had made a mistake. He had gone grocery shopping in the same town where his widow still lived. The question that haunted me most was the body. Who was in that car? The police had identified the remains as James through dental records and personal effects. But if James was alive, the dental records must have been falsified. The personal effects must have been planted. And someone had burned. Someone had died in that fire, or at least a body had been placed in that car before it went over the bridge. Where did James get a body? The thought made me sick. I found articles about illegal corpse trafficking, black market bodies, people who would provide materials for those who needed to fake a death convincingly. It was more common than I had imagined. A dark industry operating in the shadows, serving those who needed to disappear completely. James had planned this for years. He had the resources. He had the connections. Had he purchased someone's remains? Had he stolen from a morgue? Had he done something even worse? I didn't know. But I was going to find out. On the 4th day of my investigation, I made a decision. I couldn't go to the police yet. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand the full scope of what James had done. But more than that, I needed to know if Sandra was part of it. Was she complicit in the fraud? Did she know about me? Had she been planning this escape with James for years? Or was she another victim, a woman who had been deceived just as thoroughly as I had? There was only one way to find out. I had to talk to her. I spent 2 days trying to figure out how to approach Sandra. What do you say to a woman who is married to your dead husband? How do you introduce yourself? How do you explain the impossible? Hi, I'm Evelyn. Your husband is also my husband, except I thought he was dead. Surprise. Every scenario I imagined ended badly. Denial, anger, a door slammed in my face. The police called on the crazy woman, making wild accusations. But I couldn't let fear stop me. I needed answers. And Sandra was the only one who could give them to me. I found her phone number through a reverse address lookup. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the digits glowing on my screen, my finger hovering over the call button. My heart was pounding, my hands were trembling. This call would change everything. For me, for Sandra, for the life James had so carefully constructed. There was no going back once I made contact. I pressed call. She answered on the third ring. Hello. Her voice was warm, pleasant, the voice of a woman who had no idea her world was about to shatter. Is this Sandra Miller? Yes, speaking. Who is this? I took a deep breath. My name is Evelyn Mitchell. I know this is going to sound insane, and I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived it. But I need to meet with you. It's about your husband. A pause. I could hear her breathing change, cautious now, uncertain. What about my husband? The man you know as David Miller. He's also known as James Mitchell. He's been married to me for 14 years, and 6 months ago, he faked his own death. Silence. Long, terrible silence. I don't know who you are, Sandra finally said, her voice hardening. But this is a sick joke. My husband is not. He was at Morrison's grocery 3 days ago, I interrupted. Buying apples, Honeycrisp. He squeezes them gently to check the firmness. He always picks the ones on the right side of the display because he thinks they're fresher. The silence returned. How do you know that? She whispered. Because I've watched him do it hundreds of times, over 14 years of marriage. Please, Sandra, I'm not crazy, I'm not lying. I have evidence, documents, photographs, everything. I just need you to look at them. I just need you to hear me out. Another long pause. Where do you want to meet? We agreed on a coffee shop in a neutral location, halfway between her house and mine. A public place, safe, witnesses everywhere. I arrived early, clutching a folder of evidence, my stomach churning with anxiety. The folder contained everything: our marriage certificate, photographs from our wedding, bank statements showing James's signature, the life insurance policy, the death certificate. Proof that my husband existed. Proof that he had been married to me when he was supposedly single. Proof that our entire lives had been built on lies. Sandra arrived at exactly 2:00 p.m. She was smaller than she had seemed from a distance. Petite, fragile almost. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. Her eyes were red-rimmed, she had been crying. She spotted me immediately. I was the only woman sitting alone with a folder of documents spread across the table. She approached slowly, cautiously, like she was approaching a wild animal. Evelyn. Sandra, thank you for coming. She slid into the seat across from me. Her hands were shaking. I almost didn't, she admitted. I almost convinced myself you were some kind of scam artist, someone trying to extort money, something that made sense. But I searched your name, Evelyn Mitchell. I found your husband's obituary. James Mitchell, beloved husband, died 6 months ago in a tragic accident. She looked at me with eyes that held the first glimmers of terrible understanding. The photo in the obituary, it's David. Yes, I said quietly, because David and James are the same person. I walked her through the evidence. Our marriage certificate, dated 14 years ago. Photographs from our wedding, our anniversaries, our vacations together. The life insurance policy, naming me as beneficiary. The death certificate, confirming James Mitchell's demise. Bank statements showing accounts in both names, with identical signatures. Tax returns filed jointly, year after year. Sandra studied each document with growing horror. Her hands trembled. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I don't understand," she whispered. He told me his first wife died in childbirth. Years before we met, he said he was a widower." "He told me he was single when we met," I replied. "Never married, no serious relationships, just waiting for the right person." So we were both deceived, yes, from the very beginning. Sandra's story emerged in fragments. She had met David Miller 9 years ago at a charity fundraiser. He was charming, attentive, exactly the kind of man she had always dreamed of meeting. He told her he was a widower. His first wife had died giving birth to a stillborn child, a double tragedy that had left him devastated but eventually ready to love again. Sandra had been moved by his grief, his vulnerability, his slow, careful approach to romance. They had dated for a year before he proposed. They had been married in a small beach ceremony, just family and close friends. Lily had been born 2 years later, the child David had always wanted, the family he deserved after so much loss. Or so Sandra believed. "He travels a lot," Sandra said, her voice hollow. "Sales conferences, client meetings. Sometimes he's gone 3 or 4 days a week." "Pharmaceutical sales?" I asked. She looked up sharply. "Medical equipment. How did you know he was in sales?" "Because that's what he told me too. Different products. Same excuse for being away from home constantly." Sandra put her head in her hands. "Oh God, oh my God." "The trips weren't for work," I said gently. "He was with me, or he was with you, alternating between 2 lives, 2 families, 2 sets of lies. For 9 years. For 9 years, overlapping with 5 years of my marriage. So when we got married, he was already married to me." She started sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. I didn't try to comfort her. I didn't know how. We were strangers bound by the same devastation, sharing the same grief for different reasons. She had lost a living husband. I had lost a dead one. And both of us had lost something we never really had. When Sandra finally composed herself, she asked the question I had been dreading. "The accident, his death, you said he faked it." "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I saw him 3 days ago at the grocery store. He was buying apples just like he used to, and I followed him home." Sandra's face went pale. "You followed him to my house?" "Yes, I saw you come out to greet him. I saw Lily run into his arms. I watched your family through the windows until the lights went out." She stared at me, processing the implications. "You watched us." I had to know if it was real, if I was losing my mind, if grief had finally broken something in my brain. "And you're sure, you're absolutely sure it was him?" "Sandra, I was married to that man for 14 years. I know his face, his walk, his gestures. It was James. It was David. It was your husband and my husband very much alive." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Sandra asked the other question, the one I had been avoiding. "If James is alive, who died in that car?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but someone was in that vehicle. Someone burned. The dental records matched. The personal effects were his. So he planned it. For years, I think. He created the David Miller identity almost a decade ago. He built a complete second life. And when the time was right, he staged his death as James Mitchell and walked away." "Why?" "Money, maybe. Freedom. The chance to start fresh without the complications of his first life." "But why not just divorce you? Why fake a death?" "Because of the insurance money. $500,000 paid out to his grieving widow. Money he's been slowly siphoning from my accounts ever since." Sandra's eyes widened. "He's been stealing from you, even after faking his death." "Small amounts. Things I wouldn't notice while I was drowning in grief. He set it all up perfectly." That's insane. That's James, or David, or whatever his real name is. We talked for 3 hours. We compared stories, matched timelines, identified the lies that had kept us both blind to the truth. Every business trip, every conference, every family emergency that pulled him away, we traced them all, mapping the choreography of deception that had defined our marriages. He had been meticulous, careful, brilliantly organized. And he had almost gotten away with it. Almost. "What do we do now?" Sandra asked finally. I had been thinking about this question for days, turning it over in my mind, considering the options. "We have 2 choices," I said. "We can go to the police separately, file our own complaints, and let the system sort it out. Or or we can confront him together, show him that both his worlds have collided. Watch his face when he realizes everything he built is about to crumble." Sandra was quiet for a long moment. "I want to see his face," she said finally. "I want to look him in the eyes and ask him how he could do this to us, to Lily, to everyone who loved him. Then we confront him together. And the police. We call them first. We tell them everything. And when James tries to run because he will try to run, they'll be waiting." Sandra nodded slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow, before he has any chance to suspect we've found each other, before he can disappear again." "Tomorrow." We shook hands across the table, 2 women bound by betrayal, united by purpose. Tomorrow, we would face our husband. And tomorrow, his lies would finally end. The morning of the confrontation, I woke before dawn. I hadn't slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say, imagining James's face when he saw me standing in his other life. 6 months of grief, 6 months of tears, 6 months of slowly learning to live without him. And today, I would face the man who had made me mourn a lie. I met Sandra at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her house. She looked as exhausted as I felt, dark circles under her eyes, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking, the haunted expression of a woman whose world had been turned inside out. "Are you ready?" I asked. "No," she admitted, "but I'm going anyway." "The police." "Detective Morrison is waiting around the corner. 2 officers in an unmarked car. They'll move in when we give the signal." I nodded. We had spent hours on the phone with law enforcement the previous evening, explaining the situation, providing evidence, coordinating a plan. Detective Morrison had been skeptical at first. Faked deaths, bigamy, insurance fraud. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But the evidence was overwhelming. The documentation was irrefutable. And by the time we finished presenting our case, the detective was as eager to arrest James as we were to confront him. "There are serious charges here," Morrison had said. "Insurance fraud, identity fraud, bigamy, possibly theft of a corpse depending on where he got the body. This man is looking at decades in prison." Decades. The word had felt both satisfying and inadequate. We drove to Sandra's house in her car. The yellow house looked different in the morning light, cheerful, innocent, completely unaware of what was about to happen inside its walls. "Lily is at school," Sandra said quietly. "I made sure of it. She doesn't need to see this." "Good. My mother is picking her up afterward. She'll stay with her while we." She couldn't finish the sentence. I understood. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her father is a criminal, that her family is a lie, that the man who read her bedtime stories was living a double life? Some truths are too heavy for children to carry. We parked in the driveway. Sandra's hands were shaking as she turned off the engine. I could see her pulse fluttering in her throat. "He'll be inside," she said. "He works from home on Wednesdays, sets up in the office upstairs." "Then let's go." We walked to the front door together. 2 wives, 2 victims, 1 purpose. Sandra unlocked the door, and we stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and bacon. Homey, comfortable, the scent of a normal Wednesday morning in a normal suburban home. "David," Sandra called out, Can you come downstairs? I need to talk to you. Silence for a moment, then footsteps overhead, the creak of stairs. What's up, babe? I'm in the middle of a call, can it? He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He was wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. His hair was slightly mussed, reading glasses perched on his nose, glasses I had never seen him wear. He looked relaxed, comfortable, completely unsuspecting. And then he saw me. The change was instantaneous. His face went white. His body went rigid. His eyes, those familiar eyes that had looked into mine for 14 years, widened with something I had never seen in them before. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. Evelyn, his voice was barely a whisper. How did you? What are you? Hello, James, I said. Or should I call you David? He looked from me to Sandra, from Sandra to me. His mind was racing. I could see the calculations happening, the desperate search for an explanation, an excuse, a way out. Sandra, I can explain. No, Sandra said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You can't explain. We know everything. You don't understand. We understand perfectly, I interrupted. You've been married to both of us for years. You faked your death to escape your life with me. You collected $500,000 in insurance money. You've been stealing from my accounts for months. His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. And somewhere, I continued, there's a body in a grave with your name on it. A body that isn't you. Where did you get it, James? Did you steal it from a morgue? Did you buy it from a body broker? Did you kill someone? I didn't kill anyone. The words burst out of him, desperate and raw. I would never. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Explain it to us. Explain how you justified destroying 2 families. Explain how you slept at night knowing the women who loved you were living in lies. James sank onto the bottom step, his legs apparently unable to support him anymore. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. The confident, charming man I had married seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind something hollow and pathetic. It started as a mistake, he said, his voice barely audible. I met Sandra at a conference. We connected. I wasn't planning to. I never meant to. Never meant to what? Sandra demanded. Marry me, have a child with me, build an entire life based on lies. I fell in love with you, James said, looking at her with anguished eyes. That wasn't a lie. I loved you. I still love you. And me? I asked. Did you love me too? Or was our entire marriage just a convenient cover story? He turned to face me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Guilt. Real, genuine guilt. I loved you, Evelyn, in the beginning, but over time things changed. We drifted apart. You were so focused on your career, on your projects, on everything except us. I felt invisible, forgotten. So you started a second family. I started feeling alive again, with Sandra, with Lily. They saw me in ways you hadn't seen me in years. That's not an excuse, I said coldly. That's a justification. There's a difference. Sandra stepped forward. The faked death, she said. Explain that. Explain how you decided to let Evelyn think you were dead. James buried his head in his hands. The insurance money, I needed it. The business wasn't doing well. I had debts you didn't know about, gambling debts, investments that went bad. I was drowning. So you stole from your own wife. I was going to pay it back. Eventually, I just needed time. And the body, I pressed. Where did you get the body? He was silent for a long moment. There are people, he finally said. People who can provide things for a price. You bought a corpse. It was already dead. Someone from a morgue, unclaimed. Nobody was going to miss it. You bought a human being's remains and burned them in your car so you could fake your own death. He didn't deny it. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that had already been shattered 6 months ago. Something else. The last remnant of the love I had once felt for this man. Whatever remained of James Mitchell, whatever traces of the husband I had known, they died in that moment. You're a monster, I said quietly. I loved you for 14 years. I grieved you for 6 months. I cried myself to sleep every night, aching for a man who was alive and well and stealing from me while I mourned. Evelyn, don't say my name. Don't try to explain. Don't ask for forgiveness. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message. Now. The front door burst open 30 seconds later. Detective Morrison and 2 uniformed officers poured into the house, guns drawn, voices commanding. James Mitchell, David Miller, hands where we can see them. James jumped to his feet, his eyes wild with panic. This is a mistake. I can explain, you don't understand. Hands up now. He looked at me, then at Sandra, then at the officers closing in on him. And for one brief second, I saw him calculate his options. Run, fight, comply. He chose wrong. He bolted toward the back of the house. The officers gave chase immediately, their shouts echoing through the hallways. Sandra and I stood frozen in the living room, listening to the sounds of pursuit, crashing furniture, shouted commands. A scream that might have been James. Then silence. Then Detective Morrison's voice. Suspect in custody. Repeat, suspect in custody. They brought him through the living room in handcuffs. His face was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. His shirt was torn. His glasses were gone, probably crushed somewhere in the scuffle. He looked at me as they dragged him past. Evelyn, please, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them I'm not. You're exactly who you are, James, and now everyone knows it. They pulled him out the front door and into a waiting police car. Neighbors were emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. They watched in horror as David Miller, the friendly neighbor, the devoted father, the good husband, was loaded into the back of a police vehicle. The yellow house with the wind chimes would never be the same. Neither would Sandra. Neither would I. Detective Morrison returned a few minutes later. We'll need full statements from both of you, she said. This is going to be a complex case. Insurance fraud across state lines, identity fraud, bigamy, possible illegal acquisition of human remains. He's looking at serious time. How much time? Sandra asked. 15 to 20 years, minimum. Possibly more, depending on what we find during the investigation. I nodded slowly. 15 to 20 years. He would be an old man when he got out, if he got out at all. It wasn't enough. But it would have to do. The days after James's arrest blurred together. Police interviews, legal consultations, endless phone calls with investigators who needed clarification on one detail or another. My life became a whirlwind of paperwork and questions, and the slow, grinding process of justice. But beneath all of it, there was something unexpected. Relief. For 6 months, I had been grieving a ghost. Now the ghost had a face, a prison cell, and a mountain of charges that would keep him locked away for decades. The grief was gone. In its place was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The investigation expanded rapidly. Detective Morrison's team dug into every aspect of James's double life, uncovering layers of deception that even I hadn't imagined. The David Miller identity had been created 12 years ago, 2 years before our marriage. James had been planning this from the beginning. He had built a shadow self, a backup life, a parachute in case his primary existence ever became inconvenient. I was never his partner. I was his contingency plan. The body in the car was identified 3 weeks after the arrest. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 52 years old. He had died of a heart attack in a homeless shelter 18 months before James's accident. Marcus had no family, no friends, no one to claim his remains when he passed. His body had sat in a county morgue for months before someone, James, apparently, paid a corrupt mortuary worker to make it disappear. James had purchased a dead man for $3,000. He had stored the body in a freezer until he was ready to stage his death. He had placed Marcus's remains in his car, doused everything in accelerant, and pushed the vehicle off a bridge. Marcus Webb had burned in that fire. Marcus Webb was buried in the grave with James Mitchell's name on it. And no one had noticed, because no one was looking for a man the world had already forgotten. The mortuary worker was arrested a week later. His name was Dennis Crane. He had been selling unclaimed bodies for years, to medical students, to funeral homes that needed to cut costs, to anyone willing to pay. James wasn't his first customer, but James was definitely his most ambitious one. The insurance company launched its own investigation. They were not pleased to discover they had paid out $500,000 to a man who was still alive. They filed suit against James immediately. They also investigated me, making sure I wasn't complicit in the fraud. I wasn't. The evidence was clear. I had genuinely believed my husband was dead. I had genuinely mourned him. I had genuinely been deceived. The insurance company dropped their investigation of me after 2 weeks. They demanded their money back from James. He didn't have it anymore. Most of it had been siphoned off, spent on Sandra, on Lily, on the second life he had been building while his first wife wept over his grave. The bigamy charges were straightforward. James had married Sandra Miller while still legally married to me. In our state, bigamy was a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. 10 years for Sandra. Combined with the insurance fraud, another 15 to 20 years. Combined with the identity fraud, another 5 years. Combined with the illegal acquisition of human remains, another 3 to 7 years. James was looking at potentially 40 years in prison. He would be 83 years old before he was eligible for parole. He would die behind bars. Sandra and I spoke every day during those first weeks. We were the only ones who understood what the other was going through. The only ones who could comprehend the strange, impossible grief of losing a husband who was still alive. "How do you explain it to people?" Sandra asked one evening, her voice tired through the phone. "They ask if I'm okay, and I don't know what to say. My husband isn't dead, but he's gone. My marriage wasn't real, but it felt real. I loved a man who doesn't exist." "I tell them I'm surviving," I replied. "That's all any of us can do." Lily keeps asking when Daddy is coming home. "What do you tell her?" "I tell her Daddy made some very bad choices, and he has to go away for a while. I don't know what else to say." There's no right answer. You just do the best you can. Is it weird that I still love him, after everything he did? I thought about the question. I think it would be weird if you didn't. We spent years loving these men. Those feelings don't disappear just because we learned the truth. They just change shape. Into what? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring it out. We met in person regularly as the weeks passed. Coffee shops, parks, quiet restaurants where we could talk without being overheard. We compared notes, shared discoveries, processed our trauma together. And slowly, unexpectedly, we became friends. It seems impossible. 2 women who had been married to the same man, building a friendship from the rubble of his deception. But who else could understand? Who else had walked this same impossible path? Sandra and I were bound by something stronger than jealousy or resentment. We were bound by survival. 3 months after the arrest, I received a letter from James. It arrived at my house in a plain white envelope, postmarked from the county jail. I almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won. "Dear Evelyn, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask for your attention after everything I've done. But I need you to understand something. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to become the man I became. It started small, a lie here, an omission there, and before I knew it, I was living 2 lives, juggling 2 families, telling stories I couldn't keep straight. I should have stopped, I know that. I should have come clean years ago, but I was a coward. I kept thinking I could fix it somehow, find a way to make everyone happy. Obviously, I was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that the love I felt for you was real. Maybe it got buried under lies and deception, but it was there. Once, in the beginning. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm sorry for all of it. James. I read the letter 3 times. Then I walked to the kitchen, held it over the stove, and watched it burn. His apologies meant nothing. His explanations changed nothing. The man I had loved was gone, not dead, but erased. Replaced by a stranger who had worn his face and spoken with his voice and slept in my bed while maintaining a separate life I knew nothing about. James Mitchell was a fiction. David Miller was a fiction. Whoever this man really was, I didn't know him. And I didn't want to. The trial began 6 months after the arrest. James pleaded not guilty to most charges, hoping his lawyers could find some loophole, some technicality, some way to minimize the damage. They couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. The documentation was irrefutable. Witness after witness testified to his deception. Me, Sandra, the insurance investigators, the mortuary worker who had sold him Marcus Webb's body. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was held a month later. I attended, so did Sandra. We sat in the gallery together, 2 women bound by betrayal. Watching the man who had deceived us, both face the consequences of his choices. James stood before the judge, looking smaller than I remembered. Prison had aged him. His hair was grayer. His face was thinner. The confidence that had defined him for so long had evaporated, leaving behind something hollow and diminished. The judge reviewed the charges, the crimes, the impact on the victims. Mr. Mitchell or Mr. Miller, or whatever your real name is, you have committed a stunning array of offenses. Insurance fraud, identity fraud, bigamy, theft, desecration of human remains. You have destroyed 2 families, deceived countless individuals, and demonstrated a complete disregard for the law and for basic human decency. James said nothing. It is the sentence of this court that you serve 32 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to the insurance company, to your former wife Evelyn Mitchell, and to any other parties harmed by your fraud. 32 years. He would be 78 before he was eligible for release. I felt Sandra's hand find mine in the gallery. I squeezed it. It was over. After the sentencing, Sandra and I walked out of the courthouse together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A beautiful evening, a new beginning. What now? Sandra asked. Now we rebuild, I said. We figure out who we are without him. We create lives that don't revolve around a man who never deserved us. Is that possible? I think so. I hope so. And us, do we stay friends? I looked at her, this woman who had been my rival, my fellow victim, my unexpected ally. I'd like that, I said, if you would. She smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her in months. I'd like that too. We walked to our cars together, 2 survivors heading in separate directions, but somehow still connected. Bound by pain. Bound by healing. Bound by the strange, impossible journey that had brought us here. 2 years have passed since that Tuesday afternoon when I saw my dead husband in the grocery store. 2 years since I followed him home and discovered the second life he had been living. 2 years since his arrest, his trial, his sentencing. 2 years since the world I knew collapsed and something new rose from the ashes. I am 45 years old now. My hair has more gray than I used to allow. I've stopped dyeing it, stopped pretending to be younger than I am. My face has lines that weren't there before, carved by grief and shock and the slow, painful work of rebuilding. But my eyes are different too. Clearer, stronger. The eyes of a woman who has faced the unimaginable and survived. I sold the house 6 months after the trial. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room held memories of James, memories that had once been precious, but now felt poisoned. The kitchen where he cooked breakfast. The living room where we watched movies. The bedroom where we made love and whispered promises neither of us would keep. I packed what mattered, donated what didn't, walked away without looking back. The new owner was a young couple, just married, full of hope and plans and the innocent belief that love conquers all. I didn't tell them what had happened in that house. Some truths are too heavy to share with strangers. I moved to a city 3 hours away. A fresh start, new streets, new faces, a place where nobody knew my story, where I wasn't that woman whose husband faked his death. I found a small apartment near the waterfront. I took a job at the university library, quieter than my old position, less responsibility, but that was exactly what I needed. Time to breathe, space to heal. I learned to cook for one. I learned to sleep alone without reaching for someone who wasn't there. I learned to fill the silence with music and books and the gentle rhythm of a life rebuilt from scratch. It wasn't easy. Some days the loneliness was overwhelming. Some nights I woke from dreams where James was still alive, still my husband, still the man I loved, only to remember that he had never really existed at all. But gradually, the good days began outnumbering the bad ones. Gradually, I started feeling like myself again. Not the self I was before James. Someone new, someone stronger, someone forged in fire and emerged transformed. Sandra and I stayed in touch. Phone calls at first, then video chats, then occasional visits when one of us needed to see a friendly face. Our friendship defied all logic. Two women who had been married to the same man, building a bond from the wreckage of his deception. But who else could understand? Who else knew what it felt like to grieve someone who was still alive, to love a ghost, to realize that your entire marriage had been a performance in someone else's elaborate play? Sandra understood. And I understood her. She moved too, eventually. Not as far as I did. She stayed in the same state, wanting Lily to remain close to her school and her friends. But she left the yellow house with the wind chimes, the house that had been part of James's lie, the stage for his other life. She bought a smaller place, a townhouse with a tiny garden, room for her and Lily and the future they were building together. Lily asks about him sometimes, Sandra told me during one of our calls. Not as often as she used to, but sometimes. What do you tell her? The truth, as much as she can handle. That Daddy made very bad choices, that he hurt people, that he has to be away for a long time because of what he did. Does she understand? I don't think so, not really, but she's adjusting. Kids are resilient that way. And you. Sandra was quiet for a moment. I'm getting there. Some days are harder than others, but I'm getting there. We both are. Lily turned 8 last month. Sandra sent me photos of the birthday party, pink balloons, chocolate cake, a bouncy castle in the backyard. A little girl surrounded by friends, laughing, blowing out candles, completely unaware of the darkness that had touched her life. She looked happy. I hoped she would stay that way. I hoped the shadow of her father's crimes wouldn't follow her forever. James wrote to me once more, about a year after his sentencing. Another letter from prison, another attempt at explanation, another plea for something I couldn't give him. I didn't open it. I didn't burn it either. I simply wrote, returned to sender on the envelope, and dropped it in the mailbox. He had nothing to say that I needed to hear. He had nothing to offer that I wanted to receive. The man I had loved was a fiction. The man in that prison cell was a stranger. And strangers didn't deserve my attention. I started dating again about 6 months ago. Not seriously, not with any expectations, just coffee with interesting people, dinners with kind strangers, the slow, cautious process of opening my heart again. His name is Michael. He's a history professor at the university where I work. We met at a faculty mixer, both of us standing awkwardly by the refreshment table, both of us clearly uncomfortable with small talk. He's different from James in every way that matters. Quiet where James was charming, honest where James was evasive, present where James was always somewhere else, always half absent, always keeping secrets I didn't know existed. Michael knows my story. I told him on our third date the whole impossible truth, from the grocery store sighting to the arrest to the trial. He listened without interrupting, without judgment, without the morbid curiosity that so many others had shown. "That must have been devastating," he said when I finished. "It was. But you survived it." "I did. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." We've been seeing each other for 4 months now, taking things slow, building trust one small step at a time. I don't know where it's going, but for the first time in years, I'm not afraid to find out. I still see James sometimes. Not literally. He's in a federal prison hundreds of miles away, and I have no intention of ever visiting. But I see him in crowds occasionally. A man with his build, someone with his walk, a stranger who turns a certain way and for one heart-stopping second looks exactly like my dead husband who was never really dead. The recognition hits like a punch every time. Then it fades. The stranger's face becomes unfamiliar again. The ghost dissolves. And I remind myself that James is gone. Not dead, but gone. Locked away where he can't hurt anyone else, paying for crimes that will consume the rest of his life. He will never walk free again. He will never deceive another woman. He will never build another house of lies and expect someone else to live in it. That chapter is closed. And I am finally, at peace with it. I think about Marcus Webb sometimes too. The man whose body burned in that car. The man who died alone in a homeless shelter with no one to claim his remains. The man who was bought and sold like merchandise, his corpse used as a prop in someone else's escape plan. He deserved better. After the trial, I worked with Detective Morrison to ensure that Marcus received a proper burial. Not in the grave with James's name on it. That headstone was removed, the plot left empty, but in a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. His headstone reads, Marcus Webb, 1970-12023, he was someone. I visit occasionally, leave flowers, say a prayer for a man I never knew but whose fate became intertwined with mine. He was someone. James treated him like nothing. I won't make that mistake. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for walking with me through the sighting, the following, the investigation, the confrontation, the healing. Thank you for staying until the end. I know that many of you watching have your own stories. Your own grocery store moments, those impossible sightings that make you question everything you thought you knew. Your own dead husbands who turned out to be alive, metaphorically or literally. Your own elaborate lies that collapse to reveal the truth beneath. I want you to know something. You are not crazy. If your gut tells you something is wrong, listen to it. If you see something that doesn't make sense, investigate it. If your world is built on lies, you have the strength to tear it down and build something real in its place. 6 months after my husband died, I saw him alive at the grocery store. And I followed him home. It was the most terrifying, devastating, life-changing thing I have ever done. And it was the best decision I ever made. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. The lie would have kept me trapped forever, grieving a man who wasn't dead, loving a memory that never existed, building my future on a foundation of fraud and deception. The truth set me free. The truth gave me the chance to start over. The truth introduced me to Sandra, who became a sister when I needed one most. The truth revealed who James really was, not the husband I loved, but the con man who used me. And the truth taught me that I am stronger than I ever imagined. So here's my question for you. What ghosts are walking through your life? What impossible sightings are you dismissing as imagination? What truths are you afraid to pursue? Because the answers might destroy everything you know. I'm not telling you to follow every stranger who reminds you of someone you lost. But I am telling you to trust yourself. To listen when something feels wrong. to investigate when the pieces don't fit, to have the courage to follow the truth wherever it leads, even if it leads to a yellow house with wind chimes, where your dead husband is living another life with another family. The truth might break you, but the lies will break you worse. And you are stronger than either. My name is Evelyn. I was married to a man who faked his own death to escape me. I found him in a grocery store, buying apples like nothing had happened. I followed him home and discovered a second wife, a daughter, and a web of deception that spanned more than a decade. I helped put him in prison for 32 years. And I rebuilt my life from the ashes of his lies. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. I am a woman who faced the impossible and refused to look away. And that woman, scarred but whole, wounded but healed, betrayed but not broken, is someone I'm finally proud to be. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling me your own story. I read every single one, and every single one matters. And remember, no matter what ghosts are walking through your life, no matter what impossible sightings make you question your sanity, no matter how convinced you are that you're seeing things that can't be real, trust yourself, follow the truth, and don't be afraid of what you find, because the truth will set you free. It set me free, and it can set you free too. This is Evelyn, and that's my story. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.